They killed their lovers, their children, their drug dealers, and, in one case, a complete stranger. Welcome to the UK's 11 deadliest women of 2025. On the 23rd of October 2023, 51-year-old Joanna Wronska, who comes from Wrexham, North Wales, murdered her lover, 40-year-old Marcin Koziul, with a single stab to the heart in a, quote, explosive drunken loss of temper, unquote. Now viewer, if I've got you hooked on the story so far, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you. Shortly before 6:15 p.m. on the said date, police received a call from Wronska who told them that her lover had a knife. When officers arrived at their home, the woman directed them to Mr. Koziul, who was lying in bed with a large stab wound to his chest. No knife was found in the room. Despite the best efforts of the paramedics who promptly arrived after duly being called, Mr. Koziul couldn't be saved. Wronska told officers that she and Mr. Koziul had been home alone and that there was no inciting incident to her lover's death, which she claimed came by his own hand. According to the antagonist, you see, she had simply walked into the bedroom to find the victim lying on the bed covered in blood and to have him ask her to call an ambulance. The woman was arrested on suspicion of murder that evening. During their subsequent search of Wronska's house, police found a clean knife matching the measurements of the injury in the kitchen sink. Crime scene investigators later found traces of blood around the sink and taps of the bathroom where Wronska had been seen wiping her hands when the police arrived. Wronska maintained during the trial that her partner had stabbed himself. The pathologist who carried out the post-mortem, however, had serious doubts that a right-handed man could have inflicted a wound to his own chest at such an angle and with such extreme force as to fracture 3 ribs, completely severing one in fact. A rather petite woman, the perpetrator, who, as at June 2025, is aged 52 and has no fewer than 4 children, 2 of whom being adults, was, in court, alleged to have come close to stabbing a previous lover of hers. After meeting Janusz Zadunek, who I'll be referring to as Jay, in Pajezno, sorry for that awful pronunciation, Pajezcno is how you spell the place, in central Poland in 2013, Wronska went to live in Wrexham with her new man. As at the time of this recording, the 2 children that the couple subsequently had are aged 10 and 8. I don't know when they were taken into care, as they were, but their parents split up in 2021, their mutual drug and alcohol abuse having ruined their relationship. While Wronska, who was 10 years her lover's senior, accused Jay of abusive behaviour, Jay recalled an occasion from July 2021 when, after feeling a sharp pain between his shoulder blades all of a sudden, he turned and saw his girlfriend holding a knife. According to Jay, the woman then casually stated, quote, "You're lucky I didn't stab you in the heart," unquote. The prosecution instructed the jury that they had to decide whether this story of Jay's, along with his claim that Wronska repeatedly threatened to kill him with a knife, was true, and whether the perpetrator stabbed her last lover. Having been well over 6 foot tall and weighing in at all of 18 stone, Mr. Koziul, who came to the UK in 1982, was described by his sister Anna, who was 18 years older than him, as a gentle giant who would never hurt anyone. Likewise, having long since separated from his wife, Marta Koziul, Mr. Koziul was no less on good terms with her, the 2 having remained in touch all through the man's relationship with Wronska. When, in the 2000s, Mr. Koziul sustained multiple fractures and had to undergo surgery after being crushed by a bale of waste at the recycling plant where he worked, he spent all his compensation money on travel, clothes and alcohol. Having gone broke as such by 2018, by 2019 the man was mentally sick, temporarily homeless and living in Wrexham. His relationship with Wronska, who he then met in 2022, moving in with her in September of that year, soon became something of a criminal partnership, accompanied with their shared alcoholism, the 2 getting barred, for instance, from their local convenience store on account of their frequent shoplifting. While it isn't known what triggered Wronska's anger on the night of her act, it is known that the woman was drunk when she perpetrated the murder of her lover. On the 19th of May 2025 at Mould Crown Court, Wronska got life with a minimum of 15 years. A joke of a sentence, if you ask me. On the 19th of May 2024, 21-year-old Tuche Coskun, who comes from Enfield, North London, and who seems to have somehow won the right to anonymity given that there are no publicly accessible pictures of her, armed herself with a large kitchen knife, went round to the home of 42-year-old Gavin Hubbard, who was from Welwyn Garden City in Hertfordshire, just north of London, and, after awaiting the man's return home, stabbed Mr. Hubbard all of 22 times in the doorway of his home. Just before 3 a.m. on the said date, the police, the ambulance and the air ambulance were all called to a disturbance at the victim's address, which was in Linkfield, Welwyn Garden City. Despite the best efforts of the emergency services, Mr. Hubbard was pronounced dead at the scene. In line with claims from the prosecution as well as from the defence at the perpetrator's November 2024 trial, Mr. Hubbard, who, at the point of his murder, had nearly £500 worth of heroin in one of his socks, had stolen a supply of drugs from Coskun, his dealer, earlier that evening. According to the defence, of the 4 robberies that the perpetrator had suffered in her career as a drug dealer, as many as 3 had been orchestrated by her victim. While Coskun, who had allegedly been seduced into drug dealing after losing a Tesco warehouse job and who wanted to help her struggling mother, claimed she acted in self-defence, the prosecution said she had acted in revenge. The jury duly believed the prosecution, the judge himself observing, quote, "Only a person intent on causing death would strike so many times," unquote. Of the 20 stab wounds that Coskun inflicted on her victim, 9 were severe, while 1 was fatal, the perpetrator having been seeking not only to get her own back on Mr. Hubbard, but also, of course, to get her drugs back. A father and grandfather, Mr. Hubbard had turned to drugs to cope with the pain and devastation caused to him by the loss of his wife, who died from cancer, and his having seen his best friend die sometime before that in a train accident. On the 16th of January 2025 at St Albans Crown Court, Coskun got life with a minimum of 22 years. That's just not a proper sentence in my opinion. Around 3:20 p.m. on the 29th of September 2023, 61-year-old Hubert Brown, who, coming from the city of Bristol in southwest England, is widely known as Isaac, is sitting on a wall in Grosvenor Road in the St Paul's area, minding his own business when, completely out of the blue, a middle-aged woman aggressively comes towards him making racist comments and then getting her lock knife out and stabbing him. When 37-year-old Christina Howell, who comes from Easton in Bristol, subsequently appears in court over this attack, her charge has since been upgraded from GBH, grievous bodily harm, to murder, Mr. Brown having, as such, sadly died from the single stab wound inflicted on him by the perpetrator. Having all of a 20-year history of mental health disorders, around 40 minutes before she targeted and murdered Mr. Brown, Howell had shown her lock knife to the mental health nurse who had attended her address to fulfill an appointment with her. The antagonist no less abruptly walked out of the appointment 10 minutes in, having made stabbing motions and having expressed her intention to kill a, quote, Jamaican drug dealer, unquote, just before doing so. The first 999 call reporting the woman's subsequent attack on Mr. Brown came 3 minutes after the nurse's own call to the police in relation to the woman's behaviour, that call having come in at 3:16 p.m. Witnesses said they saw Howell walking with real purpose towards Mr. Brown while using racially offensive language before launching her unprovoked attack on the poor man. While a number of passers-by intervened by disarming the attacker and then holding her at the scene until the police arrived, others took it upon themselves to rush Mr. Brown to hospital by car. For the record, the victim was neither Jamaican nor a drug dealer. While in custody, Howell was deemed mentally unfit to be interviewed, but was no less charged, as I mentioned, with murder, making her first appearance at court on the 2nd of October 2023. Between then and the moment of her sentencing, the woman was held in a secure hospital where she underwent psychiatric assessment and treatment. At trial, the court was advised by no fewer than 4 psychiatrists that Howell was suffering from a mental health condition and that her disorder substantially impeded her judgment, her rational decision-making, and her ability to exercise self-control. To be exact, her mental sickness was described as chronic, relapsing, and treatment-resistant. The woman herself being described as delusional and of significant risk to others when sick. His Honour Judge Peter Blair KC was no less full of condemnation for the perpetrator, rebuking her that, quote, "You had ordered a knife online. You secreted it inside your bra and clothing. You set off from home armed with that knife and plainly you were intent on finding someone to stab. It was a racist attack, let's make no bones about that. The impact on other people of that being associated with your actions makes it all the more aggravated and hurtful. You brought his life to a sudden, violent and inexplicable end. His family have described feeling voiceless. Now they have spoken and they have been heard. They generously, in that statement, sought to honour and commend the community who went above and beyond. I join with them," unquote. Due to her mental disorders, which led to her having been convicted not of murder but of voluntary manslaughter with diminished responsibility, as of the 25th of April 2025, which is when her punishment was announced, Howell is serving her hospital order at Rampton Hospital in Retford, Nottinghamshire. In order to quell any notion of a hospital order as a soft punishment, the judge stressed that Howell could easily end up spending longer in hospital than she would have done in prison if prison had been her punishment. But since her prison term for her manslaughter conviction would have only been 6 to 8 years, the judge himself having said so, that would have been an egregiously lenient sentence itself, to my mind, and so will the woman's hospital order be if, for instance, she gets out in 8 years and a day's time. Honestly, poor Mr. Brown and his poor family. It's the early hours of the 15th of September 2024, and you, Charlotte Lawler, a 31-year-old mother of one who comes from Crouch End, North London, are dancing, drinking and laughing at the birthday party of your 15-year-old nephew over in Stepney Green, East London. Now, though, a team of paramedics are sadly backing away from you and recording the time, while all others who were present are hurriedly gathering to you in howls, screams and wails of anguish and grief. The knife with which 33-year-old Hope Rowe, a fellow guest at the party who you didn't know and who, having previously left and then later returned, stabbed you to death, was none other than your nephew's cake knife. The perpetrator murdered you in front of children and in front of your own family members. Coming from Aldgate in East London, Rowe was captured on CCTV waving the murder weapon in the lobby of the flat after killing Ms. Lawler, the murderer promptly making her escape in the car of 38-year-old mixed martial artist Lee Holder, her boyfriend. There was, in fact, also some earlier video footage showing the perpetrator reaching around her boyfriend, no less, in order to stab her victim. Rowe had returned to the party in search of her house keys and had, she claimed, suddenly been overcome with memories of her past traumas, leading her, somehow, to get into an argument with Ms. Lawler, the consequences of which I've shared. The perpetrator later attributed her act to a, quote, momentary loss of control, unquote, which could, if proven, have got her a much lighter sentence at trial than if she'd been proven to have acted with intention. In other words, she was seeking a conviction for manslaughter, which, unlike murder, doesn't usually attract a life sentence. I'll soon reveal how that went for her. Around 2 a.m, over an hour after Rowe's act, Holder's vehicle was stopped by armed police in Tower Hamlets. After advising officers that his girlfriend had jumped out of the vehicle shortly after leaving the crime scene, Holder claimed to have no knowledge of her whereabouts. He was arrested, no less, on suspicion of assisting an offender. At 7 a.m, Rowe turned herself into Bethnal Green Police Station, where she was arrested on suspicion of murder. While she went no comment in her interrogation, a phone call between her and Holder that she had accidentally recorded on her phone revealed both her comment to her lover that it was, quote, good, unquote, that she had killed Miss Lawler, and Holder's own advice to her to get rid of the knife and to avoid the police. After leaving college, Miss Lawler had had one son, Riley, who was aged around 12 at the time of his mother's murder and who his mother had raised alone. The two had, in fact, waited a whole decade for their home in Crouch End, which was, at long last, their permanent home, mother and son having been moved no fewer than 8 times before then. Miss Lawler was, moreover, all set to become a bride, she and her boyfriend, a man called Lewis, having been planning to get married. On Friday the 13th of June 2025 at Inner London Crown Court, Holder was found guilty of perverting the course of justice, while Rowe herself was found guilty of murder. As at the time of this recording, the woman was due to be sentenced on the 9th of July 2025. The judge of the April 2025 murder trial of Shilyrand Charigwati, a 30-year-old nurse from Hemel Hempstead in Hertfordshire, said that this woman's motive for unaliving her 2-year-old daughter, an act that Charigwati perpetrated on the 14th of April 2024, was spousal revenge, and that her actions showed a, quote, shocking abuse of trust, unquote. Charigwati, who came to the UK from Zimbabwe in 2010, suffocated Roselyn, her daughter, to death with a plastic bag. The perpetrator argued that she had committed not murder but manslaughter on grounds of her diminished responsibility coming from her stress and depression. Losing custody of her very daughter in late 2023, following her breakup with the child's father, a man called Washington, was presented as the cause of the woman's alleged abnormality of mental functioning. The prosecution, however, countered that the perpetrator's ability to form a rational judgment wasn't impaired. For her part, Mrs. Justice Heather Williams, the trial judge, recognised that until what she called the terrible incident, Charigwati had been a loving and devoted mother. She observed, no less, that the perpetrator had shown an unusual amount of anger towards her daughter's father, and that she, the judge, had no doubt that Charigwati had intended to kill her daughter. On the 23rd of April 2025 at Luton Crown Court, Charigwati got life with a minimum of 16 years. Yet another insulting sentence. On the 19th of June 2024, 35-year-old Erin McNeilly, who comes from Stevenage in Hertfordshire, stabbed 61-year-old Peter Lynch, her lover, to death, the woman later admitting to having been greedy for drugs, crack cocaine to be exact, at the moment of her act, and to having let her anger, quote, get the better of her, unquote. At approximately 11:50 p.m. on the said date, the police attended McNeilly's address in Walden End, Stevenage, in response to reports of a serious assault having taken place there. The victim died later on in hospital. On the note of toxic relationships, McNeilly and Mr. Lynch were violent towards one another and were both crack addicts, Mr. Lynch doubling up, if you will, as a drug dealer. After murdering her partner following an argument that they had over the sum of, get ready for this, a tenner, McNeilly entered a plea of guilty to manslaughter, not murder. Her defence cited in her mitigation the perpetrator's mental health problems, which the judge, Mark Bishop, categorically dismissed, describing McNeilly's act as savage, sudden and brutal, and declaring that, quote, I am sure that when you stabbed him, you intended to kill him, unquote. On the 28th of February 2025 at Huntingdon Crown Court, McNeilly got life with a minimum of 16 years. Not long enough. Under strict orders, allegedly from a, quote, demonic force, on the 29th of August 2024, 42-year-old Karolina Zurawska, a Polish woman who lived on the Gendros estate in Swansea in Wales, stabbed her 6-year-old son Alexander to D-He-A-T-H. Suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, at the moment of her act, the perpetrator was having a medical episode. The police were called when, after hearing screaming coming from the perpetrator's home that evening, neighbours opened her front door and saw her, quote, staring into space, unquote, and standing beside her son with either a blade or a handsaw in her hand. Alexander was lying in a pool of blood with a deep cut to his neck and with evident substantial blood loss. Paramedics arrived at the scene shortly after 8 p.m. and issued advanced life support to Alexander, but at 9:45 p.m. the child was pronounced dead. On being arrested soon afterwards, Zurawska told the police, quote, "I've killed my kid with cancer. He almost got through it. I can't believe it," unquote. Alexander had indeed suffered with a brain tumour from a young age and had received chemotherapy. As a result, he had been left with long-lasting issues, including a muscle problem, which sometimes made it necessary for him to use a cane to walk. He had also become partially sighted. Now, on the day of the incident, Zurawska's father, Krzysztof Siwi, had driven over to his daughter's bungalow, having had reason to be concerned at that moment about his daughter's welfare. He found his daughter sitting on the hallway floor, hardly speaking, except to tell her father, just before trying to attack him with a knife, that she needed to kill him. After thankfully disarming his daughter, he found her refusing to let him take Alexander away with him. And then, after he left and walked over to his car, he suffered another 2 attempted knife attacks from her. In imposing an indefinite hospital order on Zurawska on the 25th of April 2025 for killing her son and for attempting to kill her father, Judge Paul Thomas KC of Swansea Crown Court told Zurawska, who he had said wasn't by any means a wicked mother and whose claim that she had been hearing demonic voices for at least a month before her act he believed, that his aim was not to punish her but to provide her with, quote, ongoing, probably lifelong medical help, unquote. Poor Alexander. A long-term sufferer of mental sickness, on the 9th of May 2024, 37-year-old Christine Kekkonen, who comes from Baltonsborough in Somerset, southwest England, murdered her husband, 41-year-old Henry Kekkonen, with a single stab to his neck while he was in bed. At 4:21 p.m. on the said date, Christine Kekkonen sent a text message to her mum saying, quote, "Mum, please get the police here now. Please, I've done something awful," unquote. Her dad then called for an ambulance, the police being contacted as well. Despite the best efforts of the emergency services, who arrived at the perpetrator's home 15 minutes later, Mr. Kekkonen died at the scene. In a search of the perpetrator's home, the knife that the woman had used and which she had subsequently hidden beside the bed was recovered, while the perpetrator herself was promptly arrested and charged with murder. In the course of the victim's post-mortem, the pathologist found no evidence of any significant injury other than the stab wound on the left side of the man's neck. There was no evidence of blunt force, assault or defence injuries. I believe that this means that the perpetrator had caught her victim completely by surprise. Having lived together for 15 years, the couple had got married in 2011. Mr. Kekkonen had long since become his wife's primary carer, the woman's mental disorders being too serious for her to manage by herself. In Kekkonen's defence, it was argued that the woman had been in a poor mental state at the time of the murder, Kekkonen having gone as far as to contemplate suicide at that point. The perpetrator was also said to be deeply remorseful of her act. Where the antagonist's mental state is concerned, however, Judge Julian Lambert dismissed this as any sort of defence, asserting that, quote, "There is a formal diagnosis of unstable personality disorder of long standing, and against that background you have had to contend with episodes of mental illness. There was a good deal of evidence of anxiety and depression in your life. There was evidence of episodes of self-harm and auditory hallucinations. None of this provides a satisfactory answer as to why you did what you did. It may well be that you do not know yourself," unquote. Judge Lambert similarly dismissed the perpetrator's claim that she had killed her husband by accident, suggesting that the woman's motive for doing away with him was possibly that, quote, in your deluded mind, you felt he was coercive and controlling and should have done more for you. This was simply not correct. Henry promoted your welfare above his own ambitions and you always came first. Evidence from friends, neighbours and healthcare professionals demonstrated that Henry was kind and caring throughout and did all he could for you, unquote. The detective who led the investigation, meanwhile, commented that, quote, Henry's life was callously cut short that day through the actions of someone he deeply trusted and cared for, unquote. On the 24th of May 2025 at Bristol Crown Court, Kekkonen got life with a minimum of 15 years. She's got off lightly, I'd say. As at June 2025, 34-year-old Amy Pugh, who comes from Newport in Shropshire, West Midlands, is going down for the murder of her estranged husband, 32-year-old Kyle Pugh, at her home on the 22nd of March 2022. Pugh was convicted of Kyle's murder on the 12th of June 2025 at Stafford Crown Court. Drugs and alcohol were the causes of the markedly abusive and tumultuous relationship that Pugh and Kyle once had, Pugh having maliciously burnt down, for instance, the workshop in their formerly shared home where Kyle, an MC and artist, used to create his work. In November 2024, the woman got a 19-month suspended sentence for that offence, which she committed on the 15th of October 2021. I can't say whether or not Kyle's documented history of self-harm and suicide attempts sprang from his relationship with Pugh, but one such history the man had. On the night of the 22nd of March 2022, Kyle, who, having since left Pugh, was expecting a baby with his new girlfriend at this point, was over at Pugh's home in Newport, visiting the children that he and Pugh shared. At some point, the estranged couple got into a violent argument over the very pregnancy of Kyle's girlfriend, which culminated in Pugh's overpowering her ex and then strangling him with vicious force. On realising that she had knocked her children's father out, Pugh only called 999 20 minutes later, choosing to first call her father several times before then. On the phone to the ambulance, the perpetrator told them that Kyle had hanged himself and insisted that she had tried to revive him by slapping him. In court, her act of calling out to her ex while on the phone to 999, quote, "Kyle, wake up! Why have you done this?" unquote, was dismissed as nothing more than an act intended, of course, to support the lies that she was telling. Although paramedics managed to revive Kyle, the man died in hospital the following day. A murder investigation was only launched by police after Kyle's family raised concerns around the circumstances of Kyle's death. During the investigation, officers discovered that Kyle had sent messages to family and friends throughout the day of the incident, making plans with them, one voice note that he had sent to one of his friends saying that he would see him later that night. After Pugh's conviction for Kyle's murder, her arrest for that offence having come on the 1st of April 2022, while her murder charge followed in November 2024, Detective Inspector Joe Delahaye remarked that Pugh, quote, used Kyle's mental health history to manipulate and lie to his loved ones as well as to authorities, all to protect herself, and through the whole investigation she has shown no remorse for her actions that day, unquote. As at the time of this recording, Pugh was due to be sentenced on the 5th of September 2025. On the evening of the 15th of December 2022, 44-year-old Cara Alexander from Cornwallis Road in Dagenham, Essex, put her 5-year-old son, Marley, and her 2-year-old son, Elijah, or Teddy as he was called by everyone who knew him, into the bath in preparation for bed. After subsequently taking them back out and drying them, she put them in clean pyjamas and then tucked them into bed. The next morning, the boy's father, who we'll call James, came round and, on direction from Alexander herself, went to get his boys out of bed. The judge of Alexander's murder trial described what James suffered next as, quote, the stuff of nightmares, unquote. In bed in their pyjamas, the two little boys lay side by side, perfectly still, their respective last breath having come the moment before their mother had plunged them underwater in the bath the night before and then held them under for up to 2 minutes until she was certain that they were both dead. Shocked, horrified and devastated, James, who had, the evening before, grown increasingly worried when his calls and messages to Alexander regarding his having the 2 boys that weekend all went unanswered, immediately ran back downstairs screaming, quote, "Kara, Kara, Kara, what the fuck? You've killed my children!" unquote. Kara, however, who had since escaped through a neighbouring garden into another street, was long gone. About an hour later, though, the police picked her up. In court, Alexander denied the murder charge, claiming that the boys accidentally drowned after she fell asleep while bathing them. Prosecutors, however, were able to prove that due to their ages, the boys could not have accidentally drowned. The only reasonable explanation for their deaths was that Alexander deliberately drowned them. We're now left with the obvious question: why did Alexander do away with her 2 small and wholly innocent sons? The judge said that there was every sign that, before the events of December the 15th, 2022, Alexander was a, quote, caring and affectionate, unquote, mother to her boys. He observed, similarly, that James had stated that Alexander, quote, never shouted or raised her voice at the boys and never showed violence to the boys, unquote. The judge next affirmed, however, that when the woman killed her boys, she was in a psychotic state and that had been caused by a notably powerful form of CANNABIS, known as skahunk, without the huh. The perpetrator had, sadly, been smoking that thing as a matter of habit for several weeks before the day of her devastating act. On the 11th of April 2025, Alexander got 24 years, and all I can say is those 2 poor little boys. The things that some people will do for a poxy little joint. Already owing her dealer, 21-year-old Minister Enfront, who came from Kings Norton, Birmingham, 200 quid for cannabis. When 23-year-old Mya Marsh went to meet him to buy more cannabis from him, which she did on a date in November 2024, she was armed with a knife. Even though she only wanted 20 quid worth of the substance from Minister, she pulled her knife out on him, exactly as she had prepared to do after he refused her. But yet, Mya left the act of killing her dealer to her kid brother, who, on answering his sister's summons to the scene, soon got into the fight with Minister that led the 20-year-old to stab the man to death. Having tried to escape, the victim died of his injuries, which came from at least 12 serious stab wounds near the scene. After the killing, Miss Marsh went to work, quote, as if nothing had happened, unquote, choosing, notwithstanding, to go and sleep at the end of the day somewhere other than at her address. In court, brother and sister denied murder but admitted to manslaughter. The court told them that they weren't stupid and sentenced brother and sister, Mya Marsh, Isaiah Marsh, for murder at Birmingham Crown Court on the 15th of May 2025 to life with a minimum of 20 years. Not long enough. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.